Hello guys, welcome to Exercise Physiology screencast. We're looking at planning a training program. Now, as you're aware, we finished now 3 components of fitness: aerobic capacity, muscular strength, and then we've also looked at flexibility. After we've done those, we need to kind of have an understanding of how, using those kind of 3 components of fitness, how we could plan a training program. In order to do that, we have to have an understanding of principles of training and also periodization and how you use that in order to kind of maximize a performer's performance. So if I go through quickly on here, what's the key focus? Planning a training program. So what you've got then. Okay, firstly we'll look at principles of training. What are they? Slightly different to what you did at school. You probably came across the sport or SPORM principle. It's slightly different in A2. There's a couple of extra things to add to it. Then we'll have a look at the concept or the definition of periodization. Okay, so you can probably pick out that word period. So basically your training is split into periods throughout the year in order to peak at a certain event. Then we'll have a look at how they're split. So these 3 cycles, a macrocycle, mesocycle and microcycles, these are key cycles, and they're the beauty of the timing of this is these are directly linked to short, medium and long-term goals that we've looked at in sports psychology. Finally, we'll have a look at the benefits of periodization, why people use it, and how particularly the benefits of periodization are basically due to the kind of alignment to the principles of training. Okay, so going on from there then, first of all, principles of training, what are they? You will use this acronym. Okay, so the acronym is going to be VROMPS. Okay, so what you've got here is this kind of concept of variance. Okay, so you keep your training different, reversibility. If you stop training, you lose any gains. You've got overload, which is split into 3, which is the FITT, the FIT principle, moderation. Okay, and then when you come back down to there, you're going on to progression and specificity. So what you've got, as you'll probably remember, SPORM. All of those were used in GCSE. I think they've took out T, which used to be tedium, and then you add in variance. Okay, so what do they mean? If you want to just make quick notes on these. In order to make your training effective, these kind of 6-7 things need to underpin a training program. So if you're talking about aerobic capacity, you need to have these as your kind of baseline in order to make them effective. So I'll let you read and make notes on these. You need to have kind of key corner notes on each of these principles of training. I'll let you pause it and I'm going to move on. Okay, so moving on from that. Periodization then, what is it? So it's an organised division of training into a number of specific blocks, periods or phases. So I said to you periodization, remember that it's an organised division of your training into certain periods. Now some of those periods are very small, some of them are slightly bigger, and then you've got your kind of overall training cycle, the time of the training cycle, and we'll have a look at the names for those in a minute. The key objective of any kind of periodization of training is to kind of allow the athlete to progressively increase their fitness, but most importantly reach their physiological peak at the optimal time. So for example, if you're working towards the Olympics, you do something called a megacycle. Okay, if you're looking at somebody on a football season, you might do a pre-season training that's aimed at kind of peaking at certain points in the season. You'll have certain times when you do different types of cycles in order to optimize your fitness. So going through them, the big cycle, okay, is a macrocycle. This is your long-term goal basically. Okay, and this is the kind of end goal. It could be a product goal, it's an outcome, it's what you want to do at the end. So long-term goal. Now these can typically last up to a year. Okay, could be, I mean, we're going to look at the concept of a 6-month macrocycle. Okay, so we're giving you an example here. I'll give you an example. In 6 months' time, the aim is to run a marathon. That is your ultimate goal, your ultimate aim. You want to run a marathon. Now, a megacycle is basically what I said that. So a macrocycle lasted several years, e.g. get into the Olympics. Okay, so basically, a macrocycle, if that's your ultimate aim, your long-term goal, as we've looked at goal setting as long-term goals are only effective if they have kind of short and medium-term goals within them. Now these short and medium-term goals are kind of made up of, these long-term goals or macrocycles are made up of the short and medium-term goals. So they are called, the first one of those, the medium-term goal, would be called a mesocycle. Now I think it's best if we kind of look at this and say, for example, you would have several mesocycles in your 6-month plan to run a marathon. So you're looking at this concept here of saying, well, if we're saying that to keep it linked to what we've done in psychology, remember we talked about the fact that you have kind of 1 month to lose 8 pounds in body weight if somebody is clinically obese. But if we look at that kind of concept again as a medium-term goal of like in 1 month, okay, I'll put there 1, 2, 4 as a range because the mesocycles could last between 1 and 4 months. But if we kind of stick to these kind of 1 month mesocycles, that'll help us keep aligned to the goal setting in psychology. So for example, the objective within a mesocycle could be to improve your aerobic capacity. Okay, so for example, people sometimes have a mesocycle that might be a 1 month, 6-week period for pre-season that's specific to sport. Okay, so competition wise, this is another example of a kind of mesocycle. This one might be, rather than 6 weeks, this one might be a kind of a 6-month mesocycle or a 4-month mesocycle. And this is kind of looking at your kind of competition phase. And if you think about a competition phase as a mesocycle, let's say it's 4 to 6 months, you've got this and you're saying, right, if that's our mesocycle, we have to make sure that there's a tapering concept going on. And what that means is kind of when you're in the middle of competition, you will try to kind of decrease the intensity of exercise. Okay, so that would make sense when you see professional footballers, for example, at this time of the year when they're right in the middle of it, they do very, very little fitness training. It'll all be based on tactics and kind of ball work and recovery. Okay, finally, you could have another mesocycle. An example of your third type of mesocycle could be an off season. Okay, so this off season would involve maintaining general fitness. For example, footballers are given kind of GPS chips where they, even when they're on holiday, they're asked to keep a certain level of fitness. They're tracked to see what fitness they do, whether they're doing their general maintenance fitness. So to sum up mesocycles then, it can be anywhere between 1 and 4 months. An example that we're going to use for running a marathon in 6 months, okay, is to improve the aim, the objective is to improve aerobic capacity. And then I've just given you 3 examples of mesocycles that you could use. Okay, so you've said there 6 weeks, 4 to 6 months, and then you've got like another 6 weeks maybe for your off season. Okay, final cycle then is a microcycle. As you can see now, they're starting to get smaller. So we've got that macro, the big one, meso, the medium one. Now we're into the kind of small or the short-term goals. Now these short-term goals, okay, so it's a short-term plan of training. So it can last from 1 session, okay, 1 week to 3 weeks. Okay, so the number of training sessions within that period is called a recruitment unit. Okay, so an example of the type of things. This is basically going down to the nitty-gritty now. So if we're talking about the mesocycle goal was to so we had the macrocycle goal, which was to run a marathon in 6 months. Then we went down to the mesocycle goal, which was to improve our aerobic capacity rate or volume. Then we're looking down, the final one is to say, right, what are these kind of, what are the processed goals? What are the kind of things we're actually going to do? We're going to be doing interval, continuous or fartlek training in order to make sure that we can perform at the right level. So a marathon runner might do long intervals, interval training for aerobic athletes. Remember we talked about that kind of 3 to 5 minutes plus, and looking at 3 to 5 reps of that. Okay, so at 50 to 75% of your maximum heart rate. So if you can remember that interval, continuous, 60 to 80%, whatever, and you can kind of get that in. So I'm trying to keep it pretty simple here. I'm just trying to talk over the top of it so that if you wanted to write extra notes, you could. Ultimately, what's on these slides is what you need for the exam. So the benefits then of periodization, the key benefit of splitting your training up into certain stages or periods is that it allows athletes to peak at the correct time. So, you know, if you're trying to get them to peak at the start of a season, you know, you want them to be as sharp as possible, you would focus on kind of a really intense pre-season that would allow them to go work really hard at the start of the season. Also, it allows short, medium and long-term goals to be set in alignment with the cycles, so the meso, the macro and the microcycles. Micro, short-term goals, meso, medium-term goals, macro, long-term goals. And the final one, this is really important if you get a question just on the benefits of periodization, the key strength of periodization is by splitting, it allows adherence to the principles of training, which are the VROMS principles we just looked. So it allows you to use variance, okay, it allows you to use reversibility or prevent reversibility. It allows you to overload your training. It allows you to use moderation to make sure you're not overtraining. Then it allows you kind of to go into progression, so you gradually increase in your training rather than doing it a massive leaps at the start, and finding it and make sure that your training is specific to the goals you're setting, e.g. aerobic capacity is what you're trying to improve. Therefore, in order to improve aerobic capacity, there are 3 key training methods you're going to use. That makes it specific because you're doing fartlek, interval or continuous. Okay, if you can make good notes on those, please.